A corrupt cop hides fake evidence in an innocent black teen's backpack to frame and arrest him. John grew up among the cramped alleys and dusty streets of the outskirts of town, where the low fences around his simple house couldn't contain the greatness of his dreams. From an early age, he learned to get by with few resources without ever losing his smile, cultivating a quiet strength made of kindness and hope. His father, David, was a hard-working man with calloused hands who never let the harshness of life take away his gentleness. Susan, his mother, kept the household running with a sweet firmness, juggling tight finances and always providing the warm embraces that held the family together. From early on, John was encouraged to seek a different future, and the scholarship he earned to attend a respected college became the family's greatest pride, something that had once seemed impossible. Even though he dreamed big, John kept his feet firmly on the ground. He wanted to give his family more than promises. He wanted stability, to be the answer to all the silent prayers that had echoed through their home for years. With an easy smile and a sharp mind, he was well liked by both teachers and classmates who saw in him someone rare, a young man who wanted to succeed without stepping on anyone. Although John was admired and respected by most of his peers and professors, not everyone saw him that way. In the halls and classrooms of the college, where he moved with his sincere smile and calm presence, there were eyes that followed him with resentment and envy. Patrick, in particular, watched John with a heavy, silent hostility, almost instinctive. Patrick was known not only for his aggressive attitude, but also for the contempt he carried, fueled by a fragile pride and sustained by a life of privileges he never had to earn. To him, John was a living insult, proof that effort, intelligence, and character could be more powerful than any silver spoon. "Well, look who it is, the teacher's golden boy," Patrick sneered, spitting out his words with a scorn that barely hid his discomfort. John, used to dealing with taunts, simply kept walking with his steady stride, maintaining the calm that defined him. He knew Patrick didn't deserve his attention, but he also understood that the anger in those looks was the kind that sooner or later exploded. "You think you're better than everyone, don't you?" Patrick said, stepping closer, his voice dripping with bitterness. John took a deep breath, remembering his mother's advice to keep his head high and not stoop to the level of those who tried to drag him down. He didn't answer. He wasn't about to let Patrick's anger throw him off course. It was on a stifling afternoon that things got worse. Stephanie, a close friend of John's, was walking through the hallways, her books clutched to her chest, trying to avoid Patrick, who was bothering her with persistent words and unwanted touches. "Come on, Stephanie. There's no need to run. I just want to talk," Patrick said, grabbing her arm hard enough to make her stumble. "Let go of me, Patrick. I already told you I'm not interested," Stephanie said, trying to pull her arm away, her voice trembling with nerves. John, just a few yards away, witnessed the scene and felt his blood boil. Without hesitating, he walked toward them with firm, determined steps. "Let her go, Patrick," John said, putting himself between the two, his gaze harder than ever. "Stay out of this, punk." Patrick shot back, his eyes wide with surprise and anger. "I said let her go," John said, not raising his voice, but projecting an authority that disarmed the aggressor for a moment. Defeated by John's resolute look and aware of the bystanders starting to gather, Patrick let go of Stephanie with a shove, backing away, his face red with humiliation. "This isn't over," Patrick said, glaring at John with hatred before stomping away. Stephanie, still shaking, looked at John with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, John. Really. I didn't know what to do," Stephanie said, her voice still choked up. "You shouldn't have to go through that," John replied, his expression softening. "Whenever you need help, I'm here." From that day forward, Patrick's anger toward John was no longer just a silent grudge. It became an obsession. Wounded in his pride, Patrick swore John would pay dearly for the public humiliation. It didn't take long for him to seek support from the person who had always saved him from consequences, his father, George. Sitting on the leather couch in their living room, Patrick spoke to his father, his face twisted in anger. "He humiliated me in front of everyone, Dad, made me look like a coward." George, a man in uniform with a corrupt soul, listened in silence, already planning a solution. "No one disrespects one of us and gets away with it," George said, his voice carrying a dangerous calm. "I want him to suffer, Dad. I want him to know who he's messing with," Patrick said, gritting his teeth. "Leave it to me," George replied, rising with a cold, determined look in his eyes. From then on, George began following John discreetly. From a distance, he watched John's routine, his schedule, his routes, his habits. Like a predator studying his prey, George waited for the perfect moment to strike. He needed a situation where he could act without raising suspicion. "He leaves college at 5, always through the side gate," Patrick explained as they schemed together. "Good. Less crowded, fewer witnesses," George noted, mentally storing every detail. On the day of their plan, George put on his uniform as precisely as ever. The outfit, which should have symbolized protection and justice, was just a mask hiding his rotten intentions. Armed with the authority society had granted him, he set out to carry out the scheme. Meanwhile, John was finishing his last class of the day, putting his books into his backpack, his mind full of ideas for a new project he wanted to present. He headed for the side exit as usual, with no idea what awaited him. As he turned the corner, John was startled by a sharp, authoritative voice. "Hey, you kid, stop right there," George barked, approaching quickly, his hand on his holster. John froze, confused by the harsh tone, but immediately stopped, raising his hands to show he had nothing to hide. "What's the problem, sir?" John asked, keeping his voice calm even though his heart was racing. "Don't give me that sir crap. You know exactly what you did," George spat, shoving John against the wall so hard he couldn't resist. "Hands on the wall, punk." "I'm just leaving college," John tried to explain but was cut off by another shove. "College?" George scoffed. "Since when does someone like you belong in college?" Without waiting for a response, George ripped the backpack off John's shoulders and tore it open violently, purposely scattering books and notebooks across the ground. "I bet there's all kinds of crap in here. Isn't that what you people carry around?" George sneered as he rifled through the bag. Pressed against the wall, John breathed deeply, struggling not to panic, while a few people watched from a distance, hesitant, too scared to intervene. With a quick, sneaky motion, George pulled a small, foil-wrapped package from the inside pocket of his uniform. With practiced skill, he slipped the package among the fallen books beside the open backpack. "Well, well, look what we have here," George said, holding the package up like a trophy. "Looks like the model student isn't so clean after all." "That's not mine, I swear," John cried out, his voice cracking with outrage. "Of course it's not yours. None of you ever admit it, do you?" "Same old story," George said, laughing sarcastically. "I've never seen that before, sir. I've never messed with that stuff," John said desperately, feeling his throat tighten. "You think you're going to fool me with that line?" George snapped, grabbing John's arm roughly and reaching for his handcuffs. "You're under arrest." While cuffing John, George made sure to speak loudly for everyone to hear. "Another thug leaving college, and then they wonder why we do stops like this." A few people instinctively stopped to look uncomfortable, but the presence of George's uniform and his harsh tone kept them at bay. No one dared get involved. With his head down and eyes brimming with tears, John felt crushed. Every word, every action, every look made it clear that it didn't matter how hard he tried to be different. For people like George, he'd been judged since the day he was born. "Move it unless you want me to drag you," George barked, yanking John roughly toward the patrol car. "But my books," John said, looking at his scattered notebooks. "Forget it. You won't need those where you're going, George sneered with a cruel, dry laugh. John was thrown into the back of the cruiser like a dangerous criminal, while George slammed the door shut, pleased with his stage scene. On the way to the station, George kept taunting him, completely unconcerned with the brutality of his words. You're all the same. It doesn't matter if you get books, scholarships, or chances. In the end, blood tells, George said, looking at John in the rearview mirror with a twisted smile. John stayed silent, fighting back tears, holding on to what little dignity he had left in the face of the brutal injustice unfolding before him. When they got to the station, George practically dragged John inside, showing him off like a tainted trophy. Bagged another thug pretending to be a good guy, George bragged to his fellow officers, laughing loudly. John was taken to a small, cold room for processing. The air smelled of cheap disinfectant and despair. Every step, search, photo, fingerprinting, was done with roughness and disregard. Out in the station lobby, David and Susan arrived in a rush, called in a panic. Susan's face was white as a sheet, and David could barely speak. Our son. Where is our son? David pleaded, his voice cracking. Calm down. He was caught red-handed, one of the officers said coldly. This can't be. He'd never do anything like that. Susan cried, her legs nearly giving out. The officer just shrugged, as if it were just another routine case. John barely felt time pass as he sat, handcuffed, in the station's cold room. Every minute weighed on him like a ton. His thoughts swung between disbelief and fear. He couldn't understand how everything had fallen apart so fast, how years of honest struggle could be destroyed by a single lie. Meanwhile, Stephanie was leaving class when she got the news. One of her most trusted friends came running to her, face anxious, words stumbling. Stephanie, you need to know, they arrested John, the friend blurted out, voice urgent. For a second, Stephanie couldn't process it. What? She gasped, eyes wide, the floor falling away under her feet. Today, after class, they said they caught him with drugs, he said. But the words faded as Stephanie was already running, barely breathing, toward the police station. Her heart pounded, her mind spinning, refusing to accept the absurd idea that John, of all people, could be going through this. At the station, she burst through the doors, her hurried footsteps echoing on the cold floor. The door to the detainee's room creaked open, and through it, Stephanie stepped inside, out of breath, her face pale with shock and eyes brimming with tears. She could barely believe what she saw. John, head down, handcuffed, with the exhausted look of someone carrying an entire world of injustice on his shoulders. John, Stephanie said, her voice cracking on the first word. Hearing his name, John slowly raised his head, and what Stephanie saw broke her heart. He looked different, still himself, but wounded, crushed by a brutality words couldn't describe. I didn't do anything, Stephanie, John said, his voice steady but fractured by pain. I know, Stephanie said, stepping closer, ignoring the warning look from the officer beside her. I swear, Stephanie, I would never mess with that stuff, John said, his head dropping for a moment, the weight of humiliation pressing down. I believe you, John. I believe you. No doubt at all, Stephanie said, kneeling before him so she could look him in the eyes. John swallowed hard, feeling for the first time that day a faint glimmer of hope. Why, John? Why would they do this to you? Stephanie asked, gripping his handcuffed hands tightly. John took a deep breath before answering, as if needing to summon courage from deep within. It was Patrick's dad, John said, staring at the floor, the words feeling like boulders. The cop who arrested me, that's George, his dad. Stephanie's eyes widened as the truth hit her. Patrick, that day, he promised, Stephanie muttered, remembering the hate in Patrick's eyes when John had defended her. He promised to make me pay, John said with a bitter smile. And he did. So it was all a setup, Stephanie said, her voice trembling with outrage. Of course it was, John replied, anger and helplessness mingling. Patrick knows his dad will do anything to protect him. Always has. Always covered everything up. I was just another obstacle for them to crush. Stephanie squeezed John's hands even tighter. I won't let this go, John. I promise. Don't trust them, Stephanie, John said sadly. They've already decided who I am, before even hearing me out. Then we'll make them listen, Stephanie said, getting to her feet, determined. She knew she couldn't just wait for justice from people who'd already shown they didn't know what justice was. She needed to act, to prove John's innocence herself. That same day, as soon as she left the station, Stephanie wasted no time. Still shaken and furious, she sought out a few discreet college friends she knew she could trust, hoping to find anything that might help prove John's innocence. I need your help, Stephanie said, sitting at a small cafe near the college, her eyes determined despite her exhaustion. John was arrested unfairly, I know it. Some friends exchanged glances, uncertain, but Stephanie's determination was undeniable. I need to know if anyone can get access to the college's security cameras, she said, keeping her voice low, aware of the risk. One of them, glancing around to make sure they weren't being watched, leaned in. Maybe. I might know someone in the admin office who could help, he whispered. It's urgent, Stephanie said, almost begging. I need any footage from the college entrance and exits from yesterday, and if possible, from the side street too. Her friends nodded, understanding the gravity of the request. One quickly got up, saying he'd try to make contact. While she waited, Stephanie's heart pounded in her chest. Every minute that passed weighed on her. She knew any delay could cost John his freedom. A few hours later, still in the cafe, one friend returned, secretly holding a small flash drive. I got something. Not much, but maybe it'll help, he said, handing her the drive discreetly. Thank you. I promise I'll be careful, Stephanie said, gripping the flash drive tightly. She rushed home, locked herself in her room, plugged the drive into her laptop, and began searching the files. The screen displayed hours of continuous footage, and though exhausted, Stephanie forced herself to watch it all with intense focus. Minute by minute, frame by frame, she combed through the footage of the college's side entrance. Time dragged on. She barely blinked, her eyes burning from exhaustion and concentration. Then suddenly, she found what she was looking for. George, the cop who'd arrested John, appeared on screen. He wasn't just passing by. He paced up and down the street, watching the exit, clearly waiting for someone. Bastard, Stephanie muttered, blood boiling. She immediately saved the clip, storing it in a secure folder. It was the first real piece of evidence, proof that George had been lurking suspiciously before the arrest. But Stephanie knew that wasn't enough. She needed something irrefutable, something that directly tied John to his own innocence. She then remembered a policy that had been put in place a few months back. Every student's backpack was checked at the college entrance after some prior incidents. If I can prove his backpack was clean when he entered, Stephanie thought, feeling a spark of hope. The next morning, she went straight to the college security office. She walked down the corridor with determined steps, hiding her nerves. She knocked on the screening room door, knowing the footage was stored there. A burly guard with a suspicious look opened the door. Good morning, I need some information, Stephanie said firmly, about a student's entry yesterday. Ah, the man crossed his arms, skeptical. Why? It's very important. My friend was arrested yesterday, and I need to know if his backpack was checked, she pressed. The guard frowned, thinking, we check everyone who comes in. If anything was off, we'd have stopped him right there. Can you show me the footage of him coming in? Stephanie asked, stepping forward, urgency in her voice. The guard hesitated, glancing around as if waiting for a signal. Please, I'm begging you. This is about justice, Stephanie pleaded, so sincerely that the guard finally gave in. All right, but make it quick, he said, waving her in. In the small monitor room, the guard tapped some keys, and the footage from the previous morning popped up. Stephanie watched, barely blinking. There was John in the entry line, backpack on his shoulder, being called over for the standard check. John handed over his backpack. It was opened, checked, and handed back with no fuss. "See? Nothing there. If there was, he wouldn't have gotten in," the guard said, not realizing the relief his words brought. "Can you save this clip for me?" Stephanie asked, trying to contain her excitement. The guard looked around, sighed, and copied the video to another flash drive, handing it over silently. "Thank you. Thank you so much," Stephanie said, gripping the flash drive as if it were gold. Heart racing, she hurried home. Now she had two solid pieces of evidence: George's suspicious behavior before the arrest and the clean check of the backpack at the college entrance. But Stephanie wasn't done. She wanted more certainty. She got her friend's help again and managed to access the college's internal security cameras. For hours, she watched footage showing John walking the halls, attending class, talking to friends, always with his backpack, always in view, always surrounded by witnesses. At no time did John have a chance to mess with his own backpack alone. He was never caught alone or acting suspiciously. Every clip, every image reinforced Stephanie's conviction. John was innocent, no doubt, no loopholes. Combining all the evidence, the external footage showing George loitering, the recording of the clean backpack check, and the internal footage of John's normal routine, she had built an irrefutable case against George. Stephanie closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what she'd gathered. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but now she had enough ammunition to fight. John wouldn't be alone anymore. With everything in hand, Stephanie knew she had to move quickly. Having the truth wasn't enough. She needed someone who could use it the right way. Determined, she found a lawyer known for his work in human rights, a serious, respected professional who'd taken on tough cases and wasn't intimidated by corrupt power. When she met with the lawyer, a middle-aged man with a calm but firm manner, Stephanie laid out all the material she had gathered. Stephanie sat before the lawyer, took a deep breath to steady her nerves, and with a firm gaze began. "I'm here because a very dear friend of mine was arrested unfairly," she said, her voice controlled but full of emotion. "He's an honest person, respected at college, and he's being accused of a crime he clearly didn't commit." She then took out the flash drives and carefully set them on the table. "I've gathered proof that shows the truth. Recordings, witness statements, documents that unravel the whole case against him." The lawyer raised his eyebrows, interested, and began to carefully go through the files, pausing whenever something caught his attention. "You did an excellent job here," he said after several minutes of intense silence. "These clips clearly show the officer hanging around before the arrest, acting suspiciously. The entrance footage proves the backpack was checked and clear. And the internal cameras show the student was always in public spaces, with no chance to hide anything illegal." Stephanie nodded, anxiously. "There's more," she said, taking another breath. "Before all this, John defended me from harassment by Patrick, the cop's son. Patrick tried to hit on me and John stepped in. After that, Patrick threatened John in front of other students, saying he'd pay for embarrassing him." The lawyer frowned, connecting the dots. "And his father, George, was the one who staged the arrest?" the lawyer asked, making sure. "Yes, George has always covered for Patrick. Everyone at college knows it. It's an open secret," Stephanie said firmly. The lawyer leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin, deep in thought. "With this history, this personal connection, and this evidence, we can tear the case apart," he said confidently. In the following days, the lawyer filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs and the District Attorney's Office, attaching all the video, statements, and a detailed report of what happened. The investigation was reopened with vigor. John was officially notified that his case would be reviewed. Hearing the news in his cell, still handcuffed, he closed his eyes and felt, for the first time in weeks, that the truth might finally have a chance. Over the next few weeks, the lawyer worked tirelessly. He built an ironclad timeline showing that John entered the college with a clean, checked backpack, that the entire time he was there, John was always in public, watched places, never with a chance to hide anything, and that the only opportunity to plant evidence was during George's abusive, obviously targeted arrest. He also made sure to include the history of conflict, how John had defended Stephanie from Patrick's harassment, the public threat that followed, and the direct link between Patrick and George, who'd engineered the fake arrest. "It's all here," the lawyer said, presenting the dossier to the review board. "This isn't just an improper stop. It's a personal vendetta, motivated by revenge and prejudice." When George was called to testify, the tension was palpable. At first, he tried to maintain his composure, denying everything. "I was just doing my job," George insisted, facing the investigators coldly. "Does your job include hanging around the college for minutes before an arrest?" the lawyer asked, showing the footage. George faltered for a moment but tried to recover. "We received an anonymous tip," he said, desperately searching for an excuse. "Was that tip before or after your son was publicly embarrassed by John for defending a classmate from his harassment?" the lawyer shot back. George paled. Each question, each piece of evidence, crushed his defenses. When the video of the backpack check at the entrance was shown, proving nothing was found, and then the internal video showing John's normal day, George couldn't hide his discomfort anymore. The corruption that had protected him began to crumble publicly. His fellow officers, who once covered for him, began to keep their distance. No one wanted to be connected to a scandal reeking of racism, abuse of power, and planted evidence. The accusations of racial discrimination gained even more strength as John described in detail how he was treated during the arrest, exposed to subtle insults and blatant humiliations by George. After months of intense investigation, hearings and legal battles, justice was finally served. George was formally convicted of abuse of power, falsifying evidence, and racial discrimination. His career, which until then had been held up by favors and silent complicity, ended in disgrace. His name was forever linked to the corruption and hatred he'd tried to hide behind the badge. Patrick didn't escape unscathed either. The investigation exposed his aggressive behavior, the public threat to John, and a history of incidents his father had covered up. He was expelled from college. His already weak reputation was destroyed for good. Fair-weather friends disappeared, and he fell into isolation he would never recover from. John, finally cleared of all charges, returned home to the quiet applause of his family and the few friends who had never doubted him. He came back with his head held high, but with internal scars that freedom alone couldn't heal. He received a substantial settlement from the state as an official acknowledgement of the brutal injustice he suffered. More than the money, the formal apology, read out in a public ceremony, was a small reparation for the dignity they had tried to take from him. At home, David and Susan wept as they hugged their son, proud that he'd survived without breaking. "You are our greatest victory," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the answer to all our prayers," Susan said, caressing John's face. Stephanie, deeply changed by what she'd experienced, decided to become a lawyer. Inspired by the horror she witnessed, she swore to dedicate her life to defending the rights of those who had no voice. "I'll fight so that no one else goes through what you did," she told John, certain of her choice. Years later, John graduated with honors, earning the respect of everyone who knew his story. And he went further. He became a professor at the very college where they tried to bury his dreams. There, with every class, he taught more than theory. He taught courage, resilience, hope. "You can be anything you want to be," John told his students, smiling confidently, "even when the world tells you otherwise." And for every young person from forgotten neighborhoods, for every student who bore the invisible scars of exclusion, John was living proof that dignity, when nurtured, is a force that can never be destroyed. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.